They slammed the door shut, not even looking back. My clothes were in a garbage bag, my name wiped off the lease, and their last words to me were, "You were always a burden." What they didn't know, what I didn't need to tell them, was that a week ago, I signed the paperwork. The building they lived in, it was mine now, and I had plans. The rain hadn't let up for hours. It dripped from the edge of the awning like the final ticks of a countdown I hadn't known I was keeping. My fingers, red and trembling from the cold, gripped the drawstring of the plastic bag like it was the only thing tethering me to the earth. I stared up at the second-floor window, the light still on. Shadows moved behind the curtain. Laughter, silhouettes, warmth. The kind of warmth you never miss until it's ripped from you by people who are supposed to be your family. Mom said she was tired of carrying me. My stepfather, Alan, didn't say a word. He just folded his arms and nodded. My half-brother, Liam, he smirked, tossed my backpack down the stairs like it was trash. That was the final scene of the life I used to know. No money, no keys, no place to go. Just a bag of clothes and a silent vow burning in my chest. What they didn't know was that 2 months earlier, while they laughed at my pipe dreams and rolled their eyes when I talked about building something for myself, I had been doing just that, quietly, ruthlessly. I had landed a consulting gig with a property investor who liked my ideas and trusted my hunger. When his cancer took a turn for the worse, he made me executor of a deal, a building he wanted off his hands. I pulled every favor, cleaned out my savings, and made the down payment with his final blessing. And that building, it was this one, the one they just kicked me out of. But they didn't know that yet, because revenge isn't served hot. It's cold, slow, methodical. It's a shadow in the hallway, not a punch to the face. You want them to get comfortable in the lie. You want them to laugh, to feel safe, to think they won. I didn't sleep that first night. I found a 24-hour diner on 3rd Street and nursed a coffee until the sun rose. I didn't want to call friends. They had their own problems. I didn't want to beg. No, that wasn't part of the plan. I needed to wait 2 days. Just 2. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the emails again. The legal documents bearing my name, the notarized deed. My name, Elliot James Reeve, sole owner of 208 Marwick Avenue. The building had 4 units. One rented to a sweet elderly woman named Mrs. Bellamy. One to a couple who mostly kept to themselves. The third had been vacant for months. And the fourth? That was the family unit, my former home. I made arrangements quietly. Set up a temporary P.O. box. Got a cheap weekly motel room on the edge of town. $8 meals. Waited for the new mailbox keys and the contractor I'd hired to inspect the vacant unit. The guy was a friend of the investor who sold me the building, a straight shooter named Daniel who didn't ask too many questions. He said he could have the empty unit livable within a week. I told him to install a second lock on every door, cameras in the hallway, and make sure no one else had spare access. All the while, I checked the building, sat in a borrowed car across the street, watched them carry groceries in, host their friends, pretend they were the center of the world. And that was fine, because they didn't know the eviction notice had already been drafted. They didn't know their lease, illegally filed under my stepfather's name, was no longer recognized. They didn't know their smug little castle was sinking into a swamp, and I had the only bridge. The truth is, I never fit in. I wasn't Alan's son. I wasn't Liam's brother. I was the tag-along child from Mom's first mistake. That's what she used to whisper after a couple glasses of wine. That she should have left me with my father, whoever he was. That I was ungrateful because I didn't smile enough, or clean up after Liam's messes, or pretend like Alan was my real dad. I stayed because I wanted to believe that even a shattered home could feel whole. That maybe if I worked hard enough, they'd see me, not as a burden, but as a brother, a son, a human. But every year chipped away at that illusion. The final blow came when I got laid off from my job 3 months ago. I offered to pay what rent I could, do chores, help with groceries, but instead of support, I got sarcasm. "You're almost 30, Alan had said. Time to stop playing house." "I am building something," I had replied. "You just don't see it yet." And now they would. The day of the notice, I dressed in my best, not to gloat, not to show off, but because respect matters, even when vengeance is knocking. I walked up the familiar steps to the building and handed the envelope to Alan personally. His face turned from confusion to disbelief to fury in seconds. He tore open the letter and read the first paragraph twice. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. "It's a 30-day notice of eviction," I said calmly. "Ownership of the building transferred to me last week. You're no longer tenants under a valid lease." He looked over my shoulder for someone, like this was a prank. My mother stepped out, clutching a coffee mug, her eyes narrowing. Liam came to the door in that same smug hoodie he always wore. "You're joking," he said. "No," I said. "I'm the new landlord. Your lease was forged. Your rent hasn't been paid for 3 months. I've been gracious enough to give you 30 days. "You can't do this," Alan barked. "We'll take you to court." "You're welcome to," I said, handing him a second copy, this one with all the notarized paperwork. "But I'd suggest reading the fine print before you embarrass yourself." I walked away before they could throw another insult. I didn't need to win the argument. I already won the war. That night, I unlocked the newly restored vacant unit. It was small, 2 rooms, a kitchenette, a view of the street where I once watched the world pass me by. But it was mine. I dropped my bag, sat on the floor, and for the first time in weeks, I let the silence wrap around me. It wasn't about kicking them out. It was about standing on my own feet, in my own place, with my own name on the title. Still, I'd be lying if I said the look on Alan's face didn't taste a little sweet. The days that followed were quiet, unnervingly so. After the notice, the apartment upstairs fell into a strange rhythm. I heard their footsteps at odd hours, sometimes stomping, sometimes creeping. Once, I caught Liam trying to peek through the mail slot of my door. Another time, Alan stood at the stairwell and just stared down for a solid minute, unmoving, like he wanted me to know he was watching. But he never came down, because deep down, even he knew it. He had no power here anymore. I changed the locks. I had security cameras installed in the hallways and at both exits. I recorded everything, not out of fear, but out of policy. This was no longer a home. It was a business. And I was the landlord, legally, financially, practically. But emotionally, well, that part was still catching up. Despite the silence, I knew my presence disturbed them. Every sound from below, the clinking of a coffee mug, the low hum of music, my footsteps on the kitchen tile, became an echo of threat to them. The way they once made me feel in that house, small, tolerated, unwanted, I now returned with precision. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to mock. I simply existed where they didn't want me to. 3 days after the notice was delivered, my mother knocked on my door. She didn't look like herself. Her hair undone, eyes puffy, wearing the old cardigan she only pulled out when she was desperate for comfort. She held a casserole dish like it was a peace treaty. "I thought we could talk," she said softly. "Like family. Family." That word hit me harder than I expected. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat, placed the dish on my table, and looked around the space like it offended her. It was modest but clean, modern fixtures, the scent of lemon from the air freshener, my laptop on the couch, legal folders stacked with intent. It was the home of someone moving forward. She fiddled with her fingers. "I didn't know," she began, "about the building. I didn't know you were involved in something that big." "That's because none of you ever asked," I replied. She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she looked around again, then back at me with a forced smile. "Alan's upset," she said. "He thinks this is personal." "It is personal," I said. "But it's also legal. You're squatters now, technically. No lease, no rent history, no standing." She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. "You didn't have a problem throwing me out with no warning. Now you're asking for understanding? You didn't offer me a place to land. You didn't even ask where I'd go." "I thought you had friends," she said weakly. I stared at her. "You didn't think at all." There was silence. Then she leaned forward. "So what now, Elliot? You really want us on the street?" I leaned forward too, just slightly. "No, what I want is accountability. And maybe, just maybe, I want you to feel for a moment what I've felt for years in that apartment, like you're one word away from being erased." The next week was a performance. Alan paraded around the building, glaring at the contractors I brought in. He made comments loud enough for the hallway cameras to catch, thinly veiled insults about kids playing businessman and men who couldn't earn respect, so they bought it. But he never said it to my face. Liam stayed invisible. That was his pattern: bravado in groups, silence in isolation. I spotted him sneaking into the basement one night, possibly trying to find the breaker box. I changed the access code the next morning and left a polite notice on his door. Tampering with utilities is a criminal offense. Consider this a courtesy reminder. Mom stayed quiet, trying to smooth the tension by pretending it didn't exist. She baked, cleaned, left the apartment rarely. Once, I passed her on the stairs. She smiled with that awkward motherly tightness that people use when they're trying to be forgiven without ever saying, "I'm sorry." It was all part of the game. I scheduled the building's first inspection under my name, fire code, electrical, plumbing, all of it. I made sure the inspector came during the afternoon when I knew Alan would be home. The results were damning. Faulty wires, leaky pipes, mold in the walls behind the bathroom of their unit. I presented the results at a tenant meeting. Only 3 of us showed: me, Mrs. Bellamy, and the couple from Unit 2. I outlined the repairs and my commitment to making the building better for actual tenants. I made it clear that squatters, illegal occupants, or disruptive residents would be handled legally and swiftly. The couple nodded. Mrs. Bellamy smiled and called me a good young man, and I knew my building had chosen me over them. 2 days before the eviction deadline, Alan tried one last desperate move. He came downstairs holding a folder and a smug look. "I've been speaking to a lawyer," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "And? This eviction's not valid. You didn't give a 60-day notice. You didn't notify the rent board." I took the folder, flipped through it, and handed it back. "I notified them last week," I said. "I have a receipt and confirmation. And your lease was fraudulent. There's no record of tenancy under your name. You're not protected." His smile faltered. "You think you're smart, huh?" "I don't need to think it," I said. "I just need to be right." He took a step forward. "This is revenge. That's all it is. You were always a petty little brat." I stepped in, firm. "No, this is consequence. Something you never taught Liam. Something you never held yourself to. I'm not kicking you out because I hate you, Alan. I'm doing it because you don't belong here anymore." He looked ready to explode. Then he laughed, dry and hollow. "You'll regret this." I smiled back. "No, Alan, you will." The night before the move-out deadline, I sat in my unit with a glass of water and the lights dimmed. I could hear muffled arguments above, boxes being packed poorly, last-minute scrambling, Mom's voice rising, Alan's venom seeping into every word. It was poetic, really. I had been thrown out in seconds, but they dragged their exit across days of resistance, denial, and bitterness. And when the moving truck finally arrived at noon the next day, I stood at the bottom of the stairs as they passed. Mom didn't look at me. Liam did, briefly. A flash of something that looked like resentment mixed with confusion. Alan refused to acknowledge me at all, which was fine, because I didn't need them to see me. I needed me to see me. And for the first time in my life, I did. As the door closed behind them for the last time, the building exhaled. The tension that had haunted the halls lifted like dust in the sunlight. I changed the locks that evening, personally, took their nameplate off the mailbox, walked into the empty upstairs unit, and breathed in its silence. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was mine, and it was free. The following weeks were the quietest I had ever known. The kind of quiet that doesn't press against your ears, but settles into your chest like peace. I walked through the building each morning with a mug of coffee, checked the mail, nodded to Mrs. Bellamy watering her plants, and passed the young couple walking their toddler down the front steps. Life had rhythm now. Order. And best of all, no Alan, no Liam, no bitter glares from the top of the stairs. Their apartment, once buzzing with hostility and noise, was now stripped to bare walls and empty corners. I had the unit cleaned and repainted. The mold was gone. The wires were replaced. It took just under 2 weeks to erase the physical imprint of the people who'd spent years trying to erase me. But memory doesn't scrub so easily. I still heard it sometimes, the way Alan would bark my name like I owed him something, or the way Mom would pretend not to hear when I needed help. I still saw Liam smirk when he threw my bag down the stairs. I still remembered how it felt to sleep in that cold motel bed, wondering if I had just destroyed the last bridge back to something like family. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself revenge had brought balance. I had the building. I had power. I had peace. But power and peace are not the same thing. And balance doesn't always stay still. It started with the envelope. I found it tucked into my mailbox, unmarked, no postage, no return address. I almost dismissed it as junk, but when I opened it, the paper inside was heavier than normal and typed across the center in clean black letters. Do you know what else Alan forged? No signature, no explanation, nothing else inside. At first I thought it was a prank, maybe Alan, bitter and petty, trying to stir something up. But something about the envelope felt off, too deliberate, too surgical, like whoever had left it wanted me to chase the thread. And I did. I couldn't help it. I went to the city records office the next morning and requested every file connected to the building. Ownership history, permits, code violations, lease records, anything I could legally access. The clerk handed me a thick folder and raised an eyebrow. Digging into ghosts? She joked. Maybe just one, I muttered. In the stack, I found it. A lease document dated 7 years ago, signed by a Douglas Reeve, my father's name. A name I hadn't seen in decades. But here's the problem. My father had died when I was 13, hit and run, confirmed by police, funeral, obituary, everything. So, how was his name on a lease 3 years after that? I sat in the public records room, heart pounding, eyes reading and rereading the signature. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a typo. It was his name, in writing, in a legally filed lease agreement with a notarized stamp that matched Alan's initials. I felt the room tilt. The paper suddenly weighed 10 pounds in my hand. Alan hadn't just forged the lease he used to squat in my building. He had forged my father's name. I spent the next few days buried in documents, cross-referencing bank statements, tax records, property filings. I contacted a lawyer, paid her to discreetly investigate the notary stamp. It came back, registered to a company Alan briefly ran 12 years ago, the same year that lease was filed, which meant Alan had access to notarize fake leases, which meant Alan might have forged other things, which meant I wasn't crazy for thinking that what had happened to me wasn't just emotional abuse, it was theft. And suddenly, everything snapped into focus. Alan hadn't just been cruel, he had positioned himself to benefit from my father's legacy. When Mom remarried, she brought Alan into our home, into our lives. But when Dad died, it wasn't grief that kept Alan around. It was opportunity, the insurance money, the house, the assets my father had left for me. What if they'd never reached me? What if Alan forged documents, redirected funds, silenced questions? What if Mom knew? The pain that thought caused was sharper than anything before. Because spite from Alan? That was expected. Cowardice from Liam? Obvious. But complicity from the woman who gave birth to me. That was a wound I wasn't ready to name. I didn't confront her at first. I wanted proof. So I kept digging. I found that the bank account tied to my father's life insurance policy had been closed 6 months after his death. And the forwarding address listed Alan's business, not our home. I confronted her a week later. I met her outside a grocery store near her new apartment. She looked thinner, paler, like someone trying to diet their way into a version of themselves that didn't exist anymore. She was surprised to see me, tried to smile. "Elliot, tell me about Dad's insurance," I said, no greeting, no warmth. She froze. "What? Tell me who closed the account." Her face crumpled in slow motion. I don't know what you're talking about." "You do," I said. "I found the documents, his name on a lease he never signed, money that never reached me, and all the trails lead back to Alan." She looked down at her shopping bags. "I was scared," she whispered. "Alan said he'd take care of us, that the money wouldn't last long, that it needed to be invested." "He lied to you," I said coldly, "and you let him." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry, not anymore. I was young, Elliot, lost. I didn't know how to handle anything after Doug died. Alan took control. I thought I was doing what was best. "No, you were doing what was easy." She didn't deny it, and in that moment, I knew the truth. She had made a choice. Maybe not malicious, maybe not intentional, but still, a choice. To hand my life over to a man who saw me as baggage and saw my father's death as a windfall. I walked away without another word. Closure, they say, is a door you close for yourself, not one you wait for someone else to shut. I went home and filed a legal claim. Forgery, fraud, theft of inheritance. My lawyer said the case would be complicated, but not impossible, especially with the paper trail Alan so carelessly left behind. I didn't care about jail time. I didn't even care about the money anymore. What I wanted, what I needed, was truth. And the truth was finally, fully mine. The building felt different now. Not just a monument of revenge, not just the trophy of a personal war, but a rebirth. I repurposed the top unit, the one Alan had lived in, into a community reading room. Bookshelves, free Wi-Fi, a coffee station. Mrs. Bellamy donated her late husband's library. The couple from 2B volunteered to help organize events for neighborhood kids. It became more than property. It became purpose. And as I sat in the quiet of that space one evening, a kid wandered in. Maybe 8, maybe 9, dirty hoodie, curious eyes. He picked up a book and sat near the window, reading with his feet swinging above the floor. He reminded me of me, and I realized then I wasn't rebuilding what was broken. I was building what had never been given to me in the first place. A safe place, a foundation, a future. So let them keep their silence. Let them keep their stories and excuses and shame. I have my truth, and it's written in the deeds I own, the floors I sweep, the lives I touch, and the man I've finally become. Not because they threw me out, but because I walked back in on my own terms.